is Miss Zhang Lijia. She is a factory worker turned writer, social commentator, and a public speaker. She is one of the few Chinese writers who write regularly in English for international publications. Her articles have appeared in The Guardian, the South China Morning Post, Newsweek, and the New York Times. She is the author of the critically acclaimed memoir, Socialism is Great, which is about her rocket factory experience. Her first novel, Lotus, is a work on prostitution in contemporary China. It was published by Macmillan and was featured by BBC's radio's World Book Club. She is a recipient of the prestigious fellowship in the International Writers Program at the University of Iowa. Lijia has also lectured at many conferences, institutions, and universities around the world, including Asia-EU Economic Forum, European Institute for Asian Studies, the University of Sydney, Harvard, Columbia, Stanford, and the New York University. She is a regular speaker on the BBC Channel 4, CNN, and NPR. She divides her time between London and Beijing. In the middle is our translator, Dr. Anna Gustafsson Chen. She is a Swedish translator of Chinese literature. She has translated a number of Chinese authors, including Mo Yan, Jia Pinghua, Yan Lianke, Yu Hua, Liu Zhengyun, Chi Zijian, and Chen Ran. For several years, she was a member of the board of the translators section of the Swedish Writers Union. She has also worked for 10 years at the International Library in Stockholm in charge of the Chinese collection. Our next panelist is Ms. Sheng Keyi. Keyi was born in Hunan. She later migrated to Shenzhen and Beijing. Her works include the novels Northern Girls, Bei Mei, Death Fugue, 死亡赋格, and Barbaric Growth, 野蛮生长, and the latest novels, The Womb and the Metaphor Detox Center, 警徽, and The Womb, 子宫. Many of her works have been translated into more than 10 languages, including English, French, and German. She has won several prizes in China and worldwide. Northern Girls, published in English by Penguin in 2012, was long-listed for the Man Asian Literary Prize. Death Fugue, banned for publication in China, was first published in English by Giramondo in 2014. It has been acclaimed by the New York Times as a political allegory that recalls Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Her works depict the real lives of contemporary Chinese women who live at the margin of the society. Her language has a special literary qualities. Sometimes it is enthusiastic, sometimes violent, but always experimental. The last panelist is our translator, PhD candidate at Oxford, Shi Donglai. So let me kickstart this panel by inviting our two authors to read a passage from their novel in order to give you a flavor of their work. Lijia and Keyi, could you, each of you, read your work for about 2 minutes?
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. I'm going to read from my latest work, which is a work of fiction, not memoir. If anybody may have heard of me, I wrote a memoir. But this work is a pure work of fiction. It's about a young migrant worker turned prostitute. I'll read the beginning of Chapter 3. Each chapter starts with a Chinese saying. The chapter 3 starts with the saying, if you stay long in a fish market, you'll soon get used to the stink. Standing outside the Moonflower massage parlor With 3 other girls, Lotus flashed her red smile at every passing man. She leaned against the glass front of the parlor, one leg bent like a crane's. Luring in the clients with sweet and oily words consumed a surprising amount of energy. As the evening deepened, the street became livelier. 3-wheeled vehicles and the motorbikes rattled by, stirring up dust on the narrow worn-out road. Peddlers selling ice lollies, pineapple on sticks, and meals in boxes shouted to the passers-by. In the distance, a train rumbled along towards the nearby East Station, where slow trains stopped en route to neighboring provinces. Every day, trains brought in more migrant workers from the poor interior. Most of them would end up at construction sites or in factories. Sing-song invitations floated up from the girls on the street. Big brother, massage, cheap, cheap. Come here, we have pretty, juicy girls and the best massage in town. The word massage always come out in 3 long, caressing syllables. Massage. Lotus spotted 2 tall men in their 30s, dressed in suits and ties, strutting along the street. No wonder the girls were calling out so loudly. They were a much better catch than the usual small fry. Pulling down the padded bra that forever rolled up her flat chest, Xia leapt out into the main road and seized the men by the wrists. Come, come, brothers, this way, good service. Any service you like. The thinner and the taller of the 2 men, who looked like a scarecrow, shoved her away with a chuckle. Big brothers, you think you're younger than us? Ha! Xia's heavily made-up face hardly changed color as she followed the men. Brothers, haven't you heard the saying, old ginger is hotter?
And we will do the readings bilingually, so Keyi will read the Chinese version, and I will read a passage of the English translation. It's the same passage.
Okay, I read first?
Yeah.
Okay. 我先简单说一下这个故事，我要阅读的这一段落，你不用写。
I will first explain a little bit about the context of this passage.
因为这个小说是关于一个记者，他得了比喻症。
Because this novel is about a journalist who has acquired a disease I call metaphor disease.
因为他喜欢使用尖锐的比喻，那么政府不是很喜欢他。
That's because she likes to use very accurate or very cruel metaphors, so that the government doesn't really like her.
所以在这个国家呢，有一些律师，还有一些知识分子，也同样喜欢使用比喻。
And in this country, some of the lawyers and the intellectuals also like to use metaphors.
所以最后政府干脆成立了一个戒喻中心，就是戒除比喻的这样的一个中心，像戒毒中心一样。
So in the end, what the government did was that they established a metaphor detox center, just like a drug rehabilitation center, so that they can get rid of this metaphor disease.
要把所有的这些人送到这个戒喻中心，通过治疗、洗脑，让他们做一个好人。
So that they can send these people to the centers to treat them or brainwash them, so that they will be cured of this disease.
所以我现在要读的这一段呢，是刻在这个戒狱中心门上面的一段前言。
So the passage I'm going to read now is an introduction of the center that is written on the wall.
有一点很官方，但是是我写的，有一些讽刺的意味。
It may sound official, but it is meant to be satirical.
在社会文明发展中，总会有新的疾病随之出现，危害人类身心健康。比喻症就是其中之一。它属于精神疾病，但又不完全属于精神范畴。 发病初期不易察觉，中期影响社会安定，晚期陷入癫狂而不自知，其传染与危害性不亚于人群中的一顿炸药。目前发病率超过50%，中期以上患者占8%，死亡率为4%。政府配置专人及专项资金，成立戒育中心，全心全意为患者服务。大多数患者得到根治，极少数复发。戒育中心成立以来，多次获得政府的表彰。
So the passage I'm going to read, because the book is still in English translation, the passage I'm going to read is translated by Bruce Humes. So, as a society's level of civilization progresses, new illness will always emerge to threaten the physical and mental health of the people. The metaphor malady is one such disease. It is a form of mental illness, but one that does not entirely belong to the psychological domain. During its initial stage, it is not easily detectable. In its middle stage, it affects social stability. And in the latter stage, it involves descent into a manic state of which the patient is unaware. Its potential for contagion and harm is not inferior to a ton of dynamite placed within a crowd. At present, newly diagnosed cases are growing at a rate of over 50%. Sufferers in the mid or late stage account for 8% of the total affected population, and the mortality rate is 4%. The government has allocated specialists and funds to establish the Metaphor Detox Center, which is devoted to serving the afflicted. The great majority do recover, and relapses are rare. Since the center was established, it was repeatedly given praise from the authorities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much for sharing your writing. So Lijia, your small passage just allows us a very, brief glimpse into the world of those girls. Could you please tell us more about the thematic concerns in this novel? Other thematic concerns?
I should say, first of all, this book is very much inspired by the story of my grandmother. Almost 20 years ago, in front of her deathbed, I learned a long-kept family secret that my grandmother served as a sex worker in the 30s. And of course, I was shocked. And you don't associate your grandmother with a prostitute. Especially my grandmother was the most loving person, and she was the person who actually brought us up. My mother had a full-time job, and she, after giving birth, and she always. So ever since then, I've become fascinated with prostitution. Prostitution, as most I can see, lots of people from China. Prostitution is still illegal in China, but it has grown to be a massive industry. And kind of some 10 million people working there. A few months after the discovery of my grandma's secrets, I went to Shenzhen on a reporting trip. And I went to a hotel, a hair salon near my hotel, and I wanted to get a haircut. There were 3 girls wearing very showy clothes, and they kind of giggled and said, sorry, we didn't know how to cut hair. And then I looked down the floor and I realized there was no hair shavings, so it suddenly clicked what kind of establishment it was. And I started chatting with the girls, and I learned that they were all girls from the poor hinterland of China, from Hunan, Hubei, Sichuan, that sort of area. And they come down to Shenzhen to work on the production line. And then one of the colleagues got a job at a massage parlor, hair salon. The pay was better and the life easier. That's how they started. And I thought, prostitution would be a very interesting window to see the social change brought by the reform opening up. Prostitution touches some most pressing issues China is facing today: the rural-urban divide, the growing gender inequality. The gap is actually growing, brought because of market economy. Of course, the tug of war between modernity and tradition. So I thought that's how the seed of the writing this book, Lotus, was planted.
I just want to follow up a little bit because I read this novel. I also noticed you describe a lot of intellectuals, right? The photographer is a very important figure in this novel. So, and also there's description of a corpse, right, in the detention center.
Yeah.
So are there any other concerns, like by constructing those kind of figures? So what do you want to say through those figures about contemporary China?
Well, I guess I want to kind of present, there are lots of books about China, but there are still books that explore, as I mentioned, a book of social tension brought by the reform opening up. And for example, I think migrant workers, since reform opening up, the world witnessed probably the largest human migration of peace times, where some 325 million people left in China's so-called economic miracle. It's just because of the cheap labor of migrant workers. But yet they are the unsung heroes, but yet people don't know, and particularly, what kind of price, the emotional cost of those women have paid. So I want to, they are talking about the migrant issue, but also I want to introduce characters, intellectuals like the photographer. Because the leading, I should explain a little bit. It's a book, for me, it's a book about a young woman, her journey of finding herself. It's also a love story, two characters. One is a sex worker, another one is a middle-aged intellectual photographer. It's a love story, but a word of warning, this is not a Chinese version of Pretty Woman. I actually don't like the word. So this is...
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your personal stories. I'd like to ask the same question to Keyi. So what got you into writing?
Okay. So I speak in Chinese, sorry. 我们有时候我们做一些事情，可能并不是我们选择的，比如说写作这一条路，也不是我一开始就计划好的。
Sometimes we don't really have the choice to really say what we're going to do. So for me, writing was not something that I actively chose.
因为我是觉得我总是想要对生活的现状不满，我总是想要改变。
Because I always thought that I'm a person rather unsatisfied with life as it is.
当我还是大概是8、9岁的时候，在乡下的时候。
When I was little, like 8 or 9 years old, when I was living in the countryside.
我们家乡有一条河，那么我一直在想，河对面会是什么样的世界？
There was a river in my village, and I have always been thinking what it was like to live beyond the river.
当我那年大概9岁或10岁，当我游过去的时候，我发现那边是一样的。
I was 9 or 10 at that time, and after actually I swam across the river, I found that it's the same world as the one I was living in before.
然后我非常失望。
And I was really disappointed.
然后我就在想，一定要去更远的地方，更远的远方，世界才会不一样。
And then I thought I must go to further and further and to a really far away place so that the world can be different.
所以后来我离开了家乡，我去了深圳，已经算是很远了。
So then I left my village and went to Shenzhen, which was very far for me.
So I did various jobs like editor, like report, like several jobs. then I quit my job and I moved to north of China. And I think I want to write a book for myself. Actually, I don't know how to write a book, how to write a story. So one day I got experience from a book. The writer is Chinese writer, who is Yu Hua. So then when I write this story and show it to my friends, and they gave me some encouragement for me. And the publishers, the editors, they love my stories, and I think I can be a writer. So, yeah.
Keyi, from your first major novel, Northern Girls, to the latest, The Metaphor Detox Center, I noticed a drastic change in thematic themes. So could you tell us a little bit about how you develop your writing?
I think maybe when I'm getting old, when I get more and more experience in my life, and I think I think the world is more complicated. So my English is very poor, so I need to change my language. 因为当我老了，回过头发现有很多的历史，或者说有很多的真相跟我小时候看到的，或者说童年时候看到的不一样。
Because when I got older, I found out that a lot of the history and a lot of truths are very different from what I believed when I was little.
所以我觉得，写小说是，那么我会进入一个反思的模式，我会从我们的历史当中去反思。
And I think writing novels would get me into this mode of reflection so that I can think more about our history.
其实我会想到生命，或者说整个国家的发展，整个人生的历程，其实是很厚重的。
Because I thought the development of the whole country or a human life actually is very heavy and a very heavy topic in that sense.
所以也有可能跟这个接收到世界的讯息，或者接收到不同的人群的这种状态，这种反馈，也带给我很多的启发。
And I received a lot of feedback and encouragements from my readers, I guess, and from people, and they really gave me more inspirations.
像这一本警徽是去年出版的。
And for example, this book, the Metaphor Detox Center, was published last year.
其实就是将过去的历史糅合到当代的社会当中。
And what I was trying to do was to mix the history with the contemporary.
因为我发现我们过去所发生的荒诞的事情，其实在现在仍然有发生。
Because I found that a lot of the absurd things that we thought happened in the past still happen today.
就像鲁迅先生，他在他的散文或者他的小说里所描述的这个，包括国民性啊，包括这个社会的问题啊，其实到现在他的作品仍然不过时，好像仍然在写的我们的当代。
So, for example, in the works of Lu Xun, in his essays and fiction, a lot of the topics on the national character, on social criticism, are still very relevant today.
我觉得特别有意思。我觉得你在丰富的历史当中，探索的话，会有更多的、更新鲜的发现，也能激起更多的创作的热情。
And I found that if you can explore the rich history we have, you will gain more fresh insights so that you will be more inspired to write.
对，我们现在要听听我们安娜老师的一些。
Okay, thank you. Even for our brief conversation, you'll notice how important a translator is. So my next question is for Anna. Translation is never only about finding the correct word or corresponding word, the equivalent version of English or Swedish to the Chinese word. A translator is a mediator, but is also a creator. So what aspect of translation work inspired you or interested you? Why did you decide to become a translator?
Well, I'm not sure I decided to become a translator until I already had translated about 40 books or something. After that, I was like, yeah, now I am a translator. I think that I am the kind of person who almost everything that I did in my life was more or less a coincidence. I'm not a very planned person who can see my career ahead of me and go towards that goal. So studying Chinese was kind of a coincidence. That was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to study Latin. And I sort of ended up studying Chinese, and I thought, okay, it's fine. Grammar is much better than Latin grammar, so I'll stick with this. And then we did a lot of translation in class. Our tests were basically, we got a Chinese text and we had to translate it into Swedish, and then our teacher would say if we did it right or not. And then there was, after I already graduated, there was a kind of a project where students were supposed to translate a short story each. Each student one short story by a contemporary writer, and then we were supposed to make a kind of anthology. This was in the early 1990s. And we did translate some stories, but that anthology was never published. But the two short stories that I translated were published by a very, very tiny publisher who was also actually a sinologist. But he started his own little publishing house, and he said, I can do those two. That was Su Tong's Qi Jie Cheng Qun, so Raise the Red Lantern, and another Su Tong story called Shu Nong. So they made a small book, and that was it, and I thought, okay. And then that publisher moved to we lived in the same sort of small area, so I met him in the grocery store, and he was like, do you have any other book that you think we should translate? And I said, oh, I read this guy, Mo Yan. He has a very good book called Hong Gao Liang Jia Zu. Maybe we could do that one. And he said, yeah, let's do Mo Yan. And so we did, and then that's just sort of happened, more and more and more work. So I didn't choose translation, but I think that the reason I like translating, apart from liking language, is that everything, if I look back to see what kind of jobs I've done, I can see that there's an element not so much about loving the language, but more about wanting to transfer something that when you have read something that you like, you want other people to, you want to share it with other people. So I also used to work as a librarian, and that's kind of the same thing. You want to help people to find something that they can like, which is good for them, and you know that this is good. And I read a book in Chinese, and I think this is a good book. Other people should be able to read it, right? So that's, for me, that was the thing, I think, that you, and the problem is that it just gets worse and worse because you read more and more good books, and you get more and more stressed because you don't have the time to, and you think people should read this book, and this writer, and this writer. And that's basically it. So for me, it's more about, not so much about the language, even though that's very fun. That's a fun part of the job, but more about actually being able to give, to put forward things that you have read and help other people to experience that which you yourself liked. It's a good feeling. Yeah.
So a follow-up question. As an active translator, so what are your observations about the reception of Chinese literature in Sweden?
Well, I think in Sweden, translated literature is quite a big part of what is published. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I know they usually say that in the US it's about 3% of the published literature is translated literature. So it's a very, very small amount. And I think in the UK probably maybe a little bit more, but not that much more, I guess, because English-speaking countries tend to read English original works. In Sweden, Swedish is a very small language. We have a higher percentage. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I would have said half of everything that's published, 50% is translated literature. Nowadays, it's a bit less, maybe 30-40% translated literature. Out of that, of course, Chinese is just a tiny little amount, but there are a few works. It used to be like 1 or 2 books every year, fiction. Nowadays, maybe 7 or 8, so it's increased a little bit. So generally, I think people are interested in translated literature, but Chinese literature is still very, very unknown in Sweden. Swedish is a very tiny language. I mean, if you translate into English, you have the whole world as your market. But in Sweden, you only have this like 10 million people, out of which half of them are maybe at an age where they don't read that kind of books. And so if you can sell 1,000 copies, you already have to be quite satisfied. No, not a bestseller, but you should be very satisfied. I think the problem is that people don't know Chinese literature, and they don't know what to look for. They see the name of a writer and they have no idea what this person writes about. It's very difficult to get reviews in newspapers. It's easy to produce books, but it's very difficult to promote books and to let people know. And I think that has to do with the general lack of knowledge about Chinese culture and Chinese society.
Thank you. And now I want to return to the theme of our panel, women in literature, women in translation. So for Lijia and Keyi, women's stories feature prominently in your works. So I wonder, how does the gender consciousness play a role in your creative writing process? Or do you mind being called a woman writer? Or as a woman writer, if I may use the term, as a woman writer, do you feel the urge or special responsibility of telling certain stories? 可以先回答。
OK， 我觉得对于我写作的时候呢，对于一个小说家来说，要做的可能就是要突破一切的藩篱。
I think as a novelist, what I work towards is to have a breakthrough, to break through all the obstacles.
所以是我追求一种彻底的解放在写作上，所以外界的各种的帽子其实对我来说是没有作用的。
And in my writing, I seek a sense of ultimate liberation, so all the labels from the outside actually do not really have a lot of effect on me.
可能这是只是比较适合理论家或者评论家作为一个归类来分析谈论。
And they might suit the needs of a theorist or critic more because they serve to make their job to categorize things easier.
但我必须承认，女性身份对我的写作的一种另外的一种刺激性。
But I must admit that my gender does have some kind of effect on my writing, a very stimulating effect.
甚至可以称得上恐惧和阴影。
And it can even be called a sense of fear or some kind of trauma.
因为我童年的时候见过很多的女性，因为我是在乡村长大的，我见过很多的女性，她们在生了孩子以后被拉到医院去做结扎手术的情景。
Because when I was a child, when I was a child and still living in my village, I used to witness a lot of women being taken to the hospital and get sterilized because after giving birth.
往往他们回来的时候会被那种2轮的板车用棉花被盖着，然后就这样拉回来了。
And when they returned from the hospital, they would usually be pulled by a 2-wheel cart and covered with a quilt, and then they would just be taken back like that.
其实觉得就像牲口一样。
And to me, they looked as if they're, animals.
然后那个时候，我从小我就觉得我不要结婚，我也不要生孩子，这样我就免于这种灾难。
So since then, I had been thinking that I should not get married or I should not give birth because I don't want to get that kind of disaster.
所以我最近1月份出版的这本小说子宫，因为子宫的审查通不过，这个书名通不过，然后改了另外一个书名。
The new novel I'm publishing this year was originally called The Womb, but it could not pass the censorship, so I changed the name.
这个小说写的其实就是一个家族的女性，有7个女人，她们的身体在计划生育当中，或者说在整个的社会制度当中所受的创伤和她们的婚姻家庭以及她们的这种受伤的命运。
It is a novel about a family of 7 girls who suffered from the social control, and that had a tremendous effect on their marriage and family life.
所以，这个小说可以说，这些女人，我觉得是那个未知的、可能的我。
And I always treat these women as some kind of possible unknown version of what I could have become.
或者是另一个空间的我。
Or some kind of version of myself that exists in another maybe parallel universe.
所以我在写他们的时候，其实就好像在写我自己。
So when I'm writing about them, I think I'm writing myself as well.
可能这个就是我小说当中的性别特征吧，虽然文学是没有性别的。
Then you may say that this is the gender characteristic of my work, even though I think literature does not have any gender.
Well, to start with, I don't particularly like being called 女作家. And in China, if the profession, there are not enough women, so they will say 女作家,女记者,女司机, women writer, women reporter, women driver. So that shows that women haven't gained enough exposure. Women writers haven't gained enough exposure in China, indeed in the world. I have always been interested in gender issue because I believe that how women are treated tells you a lot in what's going on in the society. I believe that one of the probably less known fact is that reform and opening up has actually expanded the gender inequality. Reform and opening up changed China dramatically, brought benefits to millions of people, both men and women. I mean, to women, particularly educated urban women. But sadly, that market economy also has expanded the gender inequality. For example, these days, urban women make 67.3% what men make. And in the countryside, it's even lower. Women make 56% of what men make. Because as China shifted from the planned economy to the market economy, women have shouldered too much burden and cost. For example, after reforms started, many state-owned enterprises started laid off workers. Women are always the first to be laid off. And they are the first to go, and there are more of them. And once they lose the job, it's very difficult for them to find jobs. And before, after graduation, in these days, female graduates facing a lot harder time in finding jobs. Before, in the planned economy, people, no matter regardless of gender, people graduates were assigned jobs. And also these days, sometimes companies would sack women once they become pregnant, and sometimes even force women to sign the promise not to have babies in the next 5 years or whatever. China, by the way, just introduced a law banning that. So anyway, that's I think talking about prostitution, this is because of the gender inequality that drove some of the most vulnerable women to take up the flesh trade.
Okay. I really like Keyi's comment. Although writers have gender, literary works are not gendered. So I want to ask a similar question to Anna. Of course, we wouldn't want to brand or label certain translator as a woman translator or not, right? But if we think about the whole process of introducing Chinese literary works into the world, gender might be our marketing tool, a very effective branding tool. So as a translator, what is your observation?
Yes. As a translator, as you said, I don't think it makes a difference if you're a man or a woman, because you're not writing your own stuff. You're translating something that somebody else did. And it's more important that you have a certain experience. I think there are other factors that are more important, like age, that influences language and what words you choose and so on. As for marketing, yes, I think there is an imbalance, I think, because if you look at, I don't know what it's like here, but in Sweden, probably about 75-80% of everything that's been translated from Chinese was written by male authors, because they are the ones who are sort of big names in China, like Mo Yan, Jia Pinghua, Yu Hua, Su Tong, Liu Zhenyun, all these, Yan Lianke, all the men. But in reality, I think women writers should have a very good chance if you translate them, because the readers, at least in Sweden, majority of readers, I think, are women. And the women readers would like to read about women. Women can read about men as well, but they would like to read also about women. And there are things and experiences that you find in women writers, in the works of female writers, that you would not find in male writers. I think that when you look at language, it's not a big difference. But there are certain topics and certain things, certain details that you can find in a certain book, and you know this was written by a woman. I can give you an example. For instance, I translated a Chi Zijian's book, it's called the Last Quarter of the Moon, I think it's called in English. And there's a passage in this book where the woman, they belong to this minority people called the Ewenkezu, the Evenks, right? And they live on the border to Russia. And they have their reindeers and so on. That's very interesting for me as a Swedish person, because their culture is exactly the same as the Sami people living in the north of Sweden. It's the same culture all over Siberia. Anyway, so this woman has this section where she's talking to her daughter about how to make, I don't even know how to say this in English. They use strips of wood from trees that they shave off very finely, and they sort of roast them in the fire, and then they can use them when they're menstruating to suck up the blood. And when I read that, I said, no man would write that, because men tend to forget about menstruation. That's not a topic that you write about. You wouldn't even think of it. Like when I read this book called The Underground Railroad by this American author, Colson Whitehead, and there's a story about a black girl who's on the run, and she hides for several months in an attic, and she can't even go to the bathroom. It's very much difficulties. And all the women who read this book in my reading group said, but what did she do when she had her period? And none of the men in the reading group even thought about this problem. So there are certain things, certain details, that this was written by a woman, because a man wouldn't even think about it. But as for language, I don't think there's a difference. I think it could be a marketing tool. I think the biggest problem, and I think there are two problems why women writers, Chinese writers, have not really made a breakthrough in Sweden. For one thing, I think there's a kind of a gender role between men and women. If I go to China and I go to a conference, I've been to several translators' conferences, I meet a lot of writers, men and women, and all the male writers would come up to you and say, this is my latest novel. It's really good. You should translate it. And then they give you these are my latest 5 books. I can send you my whole set of my complete works, and you should translate them. They're really good. They're going to win a prize. I'm sure you get an award for them. You should do this. And the women writers never do that. If you know them, they can say, oh, this is my latest book. Would you like it? And say, yeah. But they would never say, this is my great book. You translated. It's good. So and I think this is how you're taught to behave. The men are
So men are more aggressive, you say.
This is my book. And the ladies say, well, if you want to read it, I have my little book here. And this is a problem, because the men sort of push the women away in some sense. That's a problem in China. And then there's another problem, is that a lot of the younger women writers, there are lots of really, really good young writers, tend to write a lot of short stories. I have in my bookshelf so many books of the post-80s and also post-70s women writers, and almost all of them are short story collections. They're really good, but the publishers in Sweden would all say oh, but short stories are impossible. We just want novels. We don't want short story collections. Nobody will buy a short story collection by a completely unknown writer. And so that becomes sort of a problem.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
short
Sorry.
stories are best.
Yes,
I really,
they're the best.
not best for classroom use.
Yeah, but
for
they're
me.
best, and also the 中篇 are also the what's it called, novella,
Yeah, novella.
tend to be much better than the you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a problem. But
Thank
it
you very much.
Should be
Very
good, yeah.
interesting anecdotes. Thank you. I think in addition to translation, another way to get the Chinese stories out is like what you are doing, right? You just write in English. So I was wondering, my next question is about the language choice. So you intentionally chose to write in English, and Keyi, definitely you stick to your mother tongue. Does the language consciousness plays a role in creating your own story? Like, for example, a lot of your chapters are prefaced by Chinese saying. When the Chinese saying is translated from Chinese into English, it has different flavor.
First of all, I'm just so happy to be here because Oxford is the first city I ever lived after leaving China in 1990. I also want to go back to a story about the Keyi and Anna. You just talk about ended up as a writer accidentally. But in my case, I wanted to become a writer. And at school, I was good at writing. But very unfortunately, I was taken out of school when I was 16. So I was, anyway, we were very poor. So I was taken out of school and put to work. So as an escape route, I decided to teach myself English. Anyway, my English was so bad. So when I first came to Oxford, by then I already published some articles in Chinese, essays in Chinese. So one Chinese publishing company wanted me, that was 1990. So in 91, a Chinese publishing company wanted me to write a book about Western image of Chen and Mao. At that time, after the end of the Cultural Revolution in 1976, Chen and Mao kind of went quiet for a while. And then by 1993 saw his 100 years of anniversary of his birth. So there was a revival in Chen and Mao. His bodyguard wrote a book about Chen and Mao, how he loved eating Hong Shao Rou, eating his red cooked meat and things. So anyway, there was a revival of interest in Mao. So the Chinese publishing company asked me to write a book about Western image of Mao, which I found fascinating. Because the Western image of Mao very much reflects the Western people's image of China. So I took this challenge, and I interviewed many people from different walks of life, and I spent many months at the Bodleian Library researching books written by Western academic written about Mao. I finished the book, but the book didn't pass the subject, the censorship, and I was criticized the book being far too negative. So the book didn't pass the censorship. Ever since then, writing a book is a huge undertaking. Or you are writing a book, So I decided, I'm going to write English, even though my English is still. I started teaching myself English when I was 22. So I'm sure you've detected some mistakes I've made. But by deciding writing English, I felt I had this great sense of freedom and liberty. They freed me politically. So until recently, I was based in China full time, but I wrote for international publication. I didn't have to go through the censorship. And I feel compared to my Western colleagues reporting from China, I had an advantage because I grew up in China and I felt I had insight into the society. And I also literally, writing English freed me because English is not my native tongue. I can afford to be adventurous. I structure my sentence differently, use different verbs. I borrow Chinese sayings. I think Chinese is a wonderful, beautiful language, so vivid, so expressive. And I give the example of this, if you stay in the fish market for too long, you forget about the sting. It gets used to sting. So I think so I borrow the Chinese saying to kind of give a flavor, to give authenticity. So the editor who took the book and gave me good advice and felt there's a freshness in the language. How would that impact? Let me give an example. This is a book about prostitution, so I hope it's a serious book about social tension, but it's a book about prostitution, so inevitably there are some sex things in it. And I think if I had written in Chinese, the sex things would be less detailed, less and I feel if I wrote Chinese, it would be kind of too close to home. My mother was read it. But with that distance, I can be free. So I can be more expressive than I write about sex things. Does that make sense?
Yes, sure. Great. So you found freedom in a new language, in a foreign language. But sometimes constraint can also provoke creativity. So what's your take, Keyi?
我觉得特别羡慕和敬佩能够用第二种语言非母语写作的作家。
I actually quite envy and admire writers who can write in their second language.
尤其比如像美国有哈金，包括更年轻的李易云，他们是完全的用烟语写作。
For example, in America, they have Ha Jing and Li Yiyun who write all their stories in English now.
所以对我来说，我跟汉语简直就像一场指腹为婚啊，就是我永远不能改变的。
For me, my relationship with Chinese is like an arranged marriage that I cannot really change.
但是一个好处就是它对我永远充满魅力，我也没有想到，至少没有想到要改变它。
But one advantage is that it would always appear charismatic to me, and I would never think of changing it.
有时候我们没有办法改变，一方面是出于客观原因，一方面出于主观的原因。
And there are both objective and subjective reasons for this.
可能对我来说，两者都有。
For me, they both play a role.
因为大家也看到了，我刚才说英语有多么差。如果要再让我来写作英语的话，我可能还要过30年。
As you all have heard, that my English was not really that good, so you might have to wait for another 30 years before I can write in English.
但是如果有一天我真的厌倦了汉语，我一定会去努力的去学英语。但是我想，我永远都不会厌倦汉语。
If I get tired of Chinese one day, I perhaps would write in a different language, but maybe for now I don't think I will get tired of it.
尤其是当我再回过头再去重新看中国古典文学、中国古典作品的时候，我仍然感觉到那是一片汪洋大海。
Especially when I return to classical literature in Chinese, I always feel that it's an ocean of knowledge.
其实可以说几辈子都不够。
Which is too deep for you to explore, even if you have like several generations to explore, I guess.
但是大家可能可以看到我的翻译，不同语种的翻译，虽然还是我的，可能有一些改变，可能会更美。
But you guys can still see the different translations of my work, and in different languages, they may have some subtle changes that can be quite interesting.
对。
I think you want to add something.
Yes, I just want to say a brief comment. I choose to write English unconsciously, but does not mean I reject my mother tongue, and I still read all the time in Chinese, in fiction, both fiction and non-fiction.
Okay, great. I think it's time for me to open the floor. Here, first one. The gentleman, the first.
就是你。
So thanks for the inspiring talk from the panel. So I've got one question for the panel today. So although sex is the common topic when we discuss women's oppression and possible that we seek for a more positive and optimistic substitution? Or, like what we are trying to tell today is sex is the reality of our society, that it is the only approach that we can only start with sex. When we talk about women oppression. So here's my quiet. Thank you very much.
So that's a comment.
That's a comment, a question. What's your question?
Women and oppression, is sex the only topic we can start with when we talk about women and oppression?
Of course not.
I guess if you talk about women and oppression, then sex would be, because otherwise it wouldn't be women and oppression, that would be like oppression. As soon as you add the word women and oppression, then you have already added gender into the issue. If you talk about oppression, then you have all kinds of different, like, economic differences or educational or so. But as soon as you say women and oppression, then the women are already in there. So you can't remove them.
Gentleman at the back. Yes. Can you hear?
What UK publishers can do to help Chinese writers? Yeah. What UK publishers can do to help Chinese writers?
Over lunch, we were talking about this, that although some mainstream publisher published some works published by works by Chinese or Asian writers, but often those Asian writers' works are published by small independent publishers. This, just the day before yesterday, I went to one of my Japanese writer friend was in town, and her work, she was a really well-established writer in Japan, and one of her novels just come out in English called The Little House, and it was published by really small independent publisher. That seems just the case. I don't know how, but I think China, the Chinese government is trying to encourage translation, promoting writers. Of course, they're promoting writers they sanction, and they offer some money for translators. Is that right?
Yes.
Any more questions? There. Yeah, it's you.
Thank you for very interesting discussion. To think about the use of language as the medium for communicating ideas, what is the one most quintessentially Chinese phrase or word that you think that you just get that moment and you think, I don't know how to translate this. There isn't such a concept in other languages. And just represents the Chinese culture and philosophy so much.
A very specific question. Okay. So what's the Chinese word, quintessential Chinese words or ideas that you cannot be translated?
I'm sure there are such words just kind of cannot convey the meaning in English. Like one word that can come to my mind was 焦头烂额. He was so busy, also kind of it was just so busy, everything's gone wrong. It was just, 焦头烂额. When I couldn't find this expression right, I turned to Chinese. So 焦头烂额 is kind of, your head is bent. How to translate that? How to translate?
Rotten forehead.
Yes, just to kind of really describe something extremely anxious, I think that's really great expression, but there's no really equivalent way to describe that in English, I think, yeah.
So Anna, have you encountered such a case There's a quintessential Chinese concept which cannot be delivered into a different language.
Yes, I think so, but I can't remember now.
So what's
I
your
sort of
normal
blocked that out.
strategy when you
I
encounter?
think a lot of things can be I think almost everything can be translated, but not perfectly. You know, it's like a degree. And there are cases when you can translate the words, but they don't have any meaning because you have to know the whole history. I think a lot of when I translated Jia Pingwa's Qin Chang, the Qin opera, they have lots of references to Chinese opera, Qin opera, and to people that sort of, and they just give you a name of some person in a Chinese opera, and everybody knows this whole story behind this person, and he was a brave person, and he did this. But for a Swedish person, that's just a name. You have no idea what that
Do you use footnotes to give those cultural
Well,
reference?
no, I probably would sort of insert a little bit like the very brave so-and-so, and you would get some idea about what it is. But I think this is a problem that exists in every language. One more sort of, you might think is very strange, but I translated a book once by a Chinese writer living now in London called Ma Jian. He wrote a short story collection. I think it was the one that called La Mian Zhe, the noodle maker. And I think it was in this book that he, in one of the short stories, he had this Wai Hui Juan. You know, I mean, you are all very young, so you haven't even experienced it. This had the foreign exchange certificates. Yeah, Wai Hui Juan. So how do you translate that? Foreign, but in Swedish we don't even say foreign. And you had that, actually I had to make a footnote. It's like money that you got when you exchange foreign currency, but it was not the renminbi, it was another currency because you only use in a specific kind of shop. And it has this whole idea of that time.
Product of marketing.
Yes. And you know that when somebody has this Wai Hui, that it's something else. That's something that's very difficult. I think for a lot of younger people, Chinese people would also be very strange words because you have never experienced that.
Yes. Keyi, many of your works have been translated into different languages. So how do you normally work with your translator?
我觉得这个问题特别有意思。我有一个翻译，他是美国人，他在中国住了30年，算是一个中国通吧。
And I think this question is very interesting. I had one translator that was American, and he or she, I guess, lived in China for 30 years, and he is really a China expert.
对，他也翻译了上海宝贝，还有迟子建的《额尔古纳河》。那么他就翻译了我的警徽样章，就是1万多字，然后他给我写了3封信，每一封信都有1000多字。就有问题。
He also translated Shanghai Baby and some works by Chu Zhijian. He translated a chapter of my work, the Metaphor Detox Center, around 10,000 words, and I think it's really good.
And he wrote to her three times,
3 emails.
Yeah, 10,000 words each.
Yeah. 其中有几个问题我觉得生活了30年都不知道，我觉得这个翻译真的是太难了。
And there had been some details that even he didn't know, and after living in China for 30 years, so it's definitely a very difficult task.
比如说像打了鸡血一样，他就问这是什么意思？对。
For example, in Chinese we have this saying that you have done something. Well, literally, it means that as if you had been injected by chicken blood. But it means that you're quite excited or you're quite excitable, I guess.
对，还有比如说 ，OK， 比如还有3天不打，上房揭瓦，这个就不懂。
And expressions with rhyme, like if you haven't been injected with it for 3 days, you would have to climb onto the house.
3天不打。
上房揭瓦，他就会问为什么上房揭瓦。
Then he would ask me that why do you have to climb on the house?
对。然后让我觉得忽然中文好难啊，我不知道怎么解释。
It made me feel like Chinese is really difficult, really hard to explain.
对。 其实通过这个与翻译的这种交流呢，其实也能够学到特别多东西，也能够特别的理解翻译的难处。
So this kind of communication with the translator can actually help me learn a lot of interesting aspects of translation and understand their difficulties as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for your excellent translations. Here, sir.
Yeah, I often find discussions wearing a gender lens, having a subtext or connotation of recognizing that or protesting that women being victimized or at a disadvantage, women in literature, women in work, women in science, and so on and so forth. But we should not forget a fundamental fact that life expectancy for women is always longer than that of men, no matter Japan, UK, China, everywhere. So my question is asking a more positive angle. What is the proudest thing, the women writer here, you think personally, you feel most proud of being a women writer? Maybe never having such thing called writer's block?
I think for me, your comment is very interesting. I mean, of course, we all know that in many countries, apart from one country like Bangladesh, where men outlive women, in most normal countries, women live longer, but does not imply that women enjoy equality. But anyway, so I'm very happy to be a woman, and I think I can afford to be myself, and I don't have to, gamble and get drunk or to show macho success or something. I just can be myself. Yes, I'm happy to be a woman.
Okay. So, next question here. This, just you in the blue jacket. Yes.
Hi. My question is, as a writer, when you're in the process of creating your characters, you probably are vicariously experiencing their emotions, ups and downs, and it's probably a very emotionally exhausting process, I'll imagine. How do you separate out their emotions and your emotions and create a space for yourself?
其实这就讲到了一个写作上的主观和客观的问题。我比较推崇福楼拜的提倡的那个艺术观点，就是客观性。也就是说，你作者跟你的叙事、跟你的故事、跟你的人物保持一定的距离，以便于更为冷静的去审视。
So this question has to do with the dialectic between the subjective and objective, and I personally believe in Flaubert theory on objectivity, and that is to say, writers should keep a distance from the characters they create, so that you can you can be core-minded about it.
其实不管是哪一种叙事方式，如何解放你的心灵、解放你的语言，是最重要的。
Actually, no matter what kind of narrative you're constructing, to liberate your story or liberate your agenda is the most important thing.
我记得我遇到过好几个人说要写一个小说，写他的家族，可是他又担心他的妈妈怎么看他，担心他的爷爷怎么看他，所以他这个小说永远动不了笔。
So actually, I have met several people who said to me that they want to write a novel about their family, but they are constantly worried about what kind of feedback they would receive from their family members, like their mom, their grandfather. So in the end, they can never produce a novel.
所以我觉得在写作的时候，最好的就是你自己的生活的身份抹掉，你就是一个作家，用一双客观的眼睛在洞察、在观察、在想象。
So for me, I always think that it's best to just erase your own identity in life when you write, so that you can afford to be more objective in your writing with regards to your characters.
那个像卡尔维诺说的，用一种比较轻易去表达非常沉重的东西。
Just like the Italian writer Calvino said, we should express something heavy with a feeling of easiness.
I think one thing you said is very true, that for me it is quite an emotional draining process to write a book. I mean, I created them, they're like my babies, and I really care about them, and for me they are real.
Next question.
And we have a lot of non-Chinese students who is learning about China now. And when they realize that I used to be a media student, they ask me like, what is your definition towards media in China? And I use a quote from my class book, which is, the media in China is the tongue and lips of the Communist Party of China and also the public. And they ask like, if your media workers works for the Chinese government, then who will censor the Chinese government in your country? And there was the same silence like now. And so my question is like, what is your attitude towards the censorship and control from the Chinese government towards media industries?
I think that's quite a broad question. If you
Yes,
want to ask
because
them about their attitude on the media industry, maybe they can talk about their own experience, but otherwise it's quite a broad question.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about their own experience with the censorship.
yes, that would work.
我想到了，我前不久去做一个书展，然后在山上去看了那个，就侯孝贤的电影《悲情城市》拍摄的那个地方。
I went to a book festival recently, and I went to one of the scenes that appears in Hou Xiaoxian's film City of Sadness.
然后呢，我看到有3棵很大的像樱花的树，但是我又不敢确定。
I saw 3 trees that looked like sakura trees, but I was not certain.
那天的雾很重，不是霾啊，雾很重。然后呢，然后那个
It was kind of foggy that day.
所以我就在想，那个是樱花变形了，因为樱花是这样开放的，但是我看到的那个樱花，它是全是这样下垂开放的。然后我认为是因为雾太重了，挤压了它们的空间，使它们无法开放。
And I thought maybe what I saw was the certain kind of mutation of the sakura tree because their shape had been changed. And I thought, 这后半句是什么 Sorry, didn't get it.
因为
The heaviness from the fall.
And I thought that's because of the heaviness of caused by the mist, right? So that the sakura tree changed shape.
所以呢，当天我的演讲当中，我就拿这个樱花来做了比喻，我就说，审查制度下的樱花可能就是这个大雾当中的开放的形式是这样的，那么没有审查制度的开放可能就是这样的。
So in my talk that day, I made a metaphor with this sakura tree, and I said, without censorship, maybe it was a certain shape that was more kind of open and outward, and with censorship, maybe literature would be suppressed and become more compact.
可是，在结束以后呢，一个非常懂行的一个当地人告诉我， 确实有2种樱花，一种就是这样开放的，一种就是这样开放的。
So after the talk, a local person who actually understands the biology of the tree told me that actually there has always been 2 kinds of sakura trees, one with one with the flower more outwardly and one with the flower like more compact.
所以本来我还为这个比喻很得意，所以顿时我就有点沮丧了。
Originally, I was quite smug about this metaphor, but then after hearing his explanation, I became a little bit upset.
但是我正好也可以用到这儿，可以回答这位女同学。
But I can also answer the question just raised with this story.
其实呢，有的樱花它即便在大雾中也能这样绽放，有的樱花即便没有雾，它也会这样开。
So some sakura trees will always, because there has always been 2 kinds of sakura trees. So even in a big fog like that, some sakura trees will just keep their original shape anyway, so they won't be changed by the fog.
谢谢。
I
Thank you.
think this is a very charming story. It's really relevant. I want to say that in China, I worked in many years in China. I write for international publication, but I also have lots of Chinese friends working for the state media. So unfortunately, there's this control, and in recent years, the control has become more severe. I was talking one day. I was sitting at talking with a friend of mine who's an editor, and every day they receive very detailed instruction on that particular day, and she was told that the newspaper reported a few incidents of suicides, and she was told that they shouldn't report too many of the suicide cases, too negative, the media to be positive. So unfortunately, yes, the media is censored, and because of that, the media cannot really play a role of supervision as it should in many free countries such as the UK. But having said that, the media in China is not total rubbish. Many wonderful journalists, they're working in a way to push the envelope, try to present the truth. So yes, so there are some being because of the pressure, some flowers gone down, and some still, despite the pressure, they blossomed. And also that same probably can be said about the Chinese literature. I mean, where Anna knows very well that China has produced some wonderful works, wonderful writers, but still I just think Chinese literature is not as vibrant as it should have been to matching the greatness of China. I think one of the 2 reasons I can think of is censorship and self-censorship.
I'd like to just add one word. I'm going to quote one of my favorite contemporary Chinese poems. 黑夜给了我黑色的眼睛，可我却用它寻找光明。The dark night gave me a pair of black eyes. However, I use them to seek enlightenment or to seek light. So this poem just aptly summarized the self-agency, right? So even under high pressure politics, each individual still can have some part of agency there. Okay, so let's move to next question. At the very back, yes. Yes.
Okay, first, I just want to show a great respect for all our panels in here. And my question is, as a female creators, I know you must enjoy your creative process, but is there any times you have been suffering? If there are, what is that come from internal, like your emotional, or the external pressure, like financial pressures? Yeah. And also another question for Anna. You mentioned about your criteria for choosing the book to translate. So what are those criteria for recent years? Yeah, thank you very much.
I can only make your second question. You're asking about the criteria. How does Anna choose? Well, what kind of criteria Anna used to select the piece to translate. And I couldn't really get the first question because of the echo from your microphone.
Okay, the first question is, I believe as a creator, you must enjoy your creative process, but is there any time that you have been suffered your creative process? And if it's from the internal factors or the externals, like financial pressures? Yeah.
Okay, we got it. Thank you. So the second question is, as a writer in your creative process, sometimes you have suffering.
Yeah.
Is that from internal or external? So Anna, maybe first.
Okay. Well, as a translator, sometimes you choose your books and sometimes somebody else chooses them and asks you to translate them. But sometimes also because very, very few publishers in Sweden know anything about Chinese literature, you get to sort of force them into publishing something that you like. I don't know if I have any particular criteria. I think the basic criteria is I like it. That's my sort of criteria. So sometimes I have been very fortunate. I've translated a lot of writers that were very famous, very big names. Lots of men, actually, to be honest. But I have also sometimes found something that I liked myself, and which some writer that was not very well known. I translated quite a long time ago, I don't remember when. There's a young woman writer called Ren Xiaowen. And right now she's already become quite famous, but at that time she wasn't very well known. She wrote this book called Dao Shang, On the Island, which is a very interesting, I was really fascinated by this book. She was very unknown. It's a very interesting book because it's not what you imagine. If you have seen her, she's like very elegant and very cute and pretty. And this book is about some people who were put in a camp on an island, and they have to sort of, they're supervised by some captain who is like, he's looking at them through cameras, and they do all these things, and they end up by everybody's killing everyone. It's like a splatter movie, like everyone dies and there's blood everywhere. It's like completely grotesque, but very, very interesting. It's not what you would expect this lady to write, and it was very odd. And it's just like, I don't even know what this is. I don't know if this is a great novel or it's just a strange novel, but I really felt that I had to translate it. So I did it, and I translated it, and I sent it to some publishers, and they were like, well, it's a very good book and it's a good translation, but we cannot afford to take this chance because we don't think we'll bring the money back. And then, a few years later, my husband, who is somewhere, unless I think he went out. No, he's there. He's trying to hide. He retired from his job, and then he said, I'm going to start publishing Chinese literature in Swedish translation as a hobby, sort of. And I said, okay, so you're going to have to publish this one. So my criteria then was not to say, like, she's a woman, or she has this elegant style, or this. It was more like, I found this book very interesting and very fascinating, and then I think I would like for other people to read it and see what they think. That's basically my criteria. A very selfish criteria. I like it, therefore it's good. So, no objective criteria whatsoever.
I think the first question regards the creative process. Inevitably, as a translator or as a writer, you suffer, right? Sometimes you suffer in this process. Does that come from externally or does it come internally? How do you deal with that?
哦，我觉得我永远在春天。我想我的写作有2个春天。第一个春天是我刚开始写的时候，是2002年。那一年我写了2个半长篇小说，还有很多中短篇小说。
I think I'm always in spring, and I have experienced 2 springs in my career. And I started writing in 2002, and I finished 2.5 novels at that time.
我觉得有一个转型期在大概是2007年。2007年时候我开始转型，就是我觉得我应该改变一下思路。我就告别了那个写探讨两性关系的小说，然后转向了历史，从历史当中挖掘一些灵感或者线索。
So I had experienced a point of transition around the time of 2007 when I decided to change my line of thinking and to shift from novels touching more upon gender issues to a historical kind of narrative to gain more inspirations from history.
所以我的第二春是应该是2016年开始，那我又完成了3部长篇小说。
So my second spring started in 2016 when I completed 3 novels.
其实写作可以说是体力活，因为这3个长篇写完以后，我觉得我的视力急剧下降，然后我看到在场的全是美女和帅哥。
I would actually say that writing is kind of manual labor because it's very tiring, and I've seen a lot of young people, beautiful faces around here, and I just feel I'm quite exhausted.
其实事实上近看的也是很漂亮。
Even though I think if you take a closer look, maybe I still look good.
其实瓶颈肯定都会遇到，也就是在创作中会遇到。那么现在来说，作为一个有10几年写作经验的老作家，肯定也知道这个东西它一定会来，但同时也一定会过去。
So in a way, as a writer with more than 10 years of experience, you kind of already know that writer's block is unavoidable, but it will also inevitably be gone in the end.
所以我现在好像是，当一个作品快要完的时候，或者还没有写完的时候，我的另一个长篇的构思已经在我脑海里蠢蠢欲动，所以觉得没有时间去钻到瓶子里。
What often happens to me is that when I haven't even completed one story, the inspiration or idea of another story had already been planted in my head, so I hardly find any time to be blocked.
I really envy Keyi. She's very prolific and also very good. I have to say probably most writers in the world are not so prolific, and take myself as example, I write very slowly. Even though I also write, apart from books, I also write articles and features, op-eds. Writing this novel took me 12 years. And I found I come from a journalist background, so leaping into fiction writing, which I find much more challenge. The freedom to write and create a fictional word, it's very exciting but extremely intimidating. Anyway, so yes, it's a painful, slow process, but I didn't give up, I stick with it, and I finished the book and published. So anyway, so yes, it's very, I mean, for many writers, it's a painful, slow process, but ultimately, very rewarding experience.
Anna, do you need to add something?
No, I can just say that I don't have to create a story, so I'm a bit more fortunate. The story, everything is created for me. But still, I always have, there's a part in this translation process when I just hate the book. Even though I chose it myself and I liked it, I will just hate it because you feel like you're never going to get to the end and it's not going to be any good. But then eventually, in the end, I start liking it again, fortunately.
We only have time for the last question.
Wow.
Okay, in the blue shirt, thank you.
What do you think about the difference of the female role in your novel? 在女性作家笔下的文学作品中的女性角色有什么不同？
I think we have addressed this question many times from different angles already. So maybe we'll take one more. Yeah, this lady. Yeah, you, just you. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, thank you to give me the last chance. I'm a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist, and actually I'm a female psychotherapist. So maybe I would like to share some experience in terms of working with patients in terms of the language. So actually I'm currently trained in NHS Foundation Trust to have to offer psychotherapy to the
clients from different background. So some of them, they actually, the English is also not their mother tongue. So when I work with them, I found some very interestingly, not only one client told me their English is not good, not bad at all, and they have been in the UK for several years, but they told me like, it's not like they can't express something clearly, or their English is not good enough, but when they talked about something emotionally, they feel it's difficult to talk about something in English, especially for the emotional issue. So, and at the moment, I will let them to.
Sorry, do you have a question? What's your question?
Oh, okay. My question is, so how do you? I mean, in terms of this working experience, I'm thinking, although you can talk about, I mean, it's fascinating for the author to write in English, but I feel sometimes the English is not very easily to expressed, especially the intensity will not be the same. So I'm just wondering, maybe the translator or the author writing in a second language, how do you deal with this? Am I clear?
Emotions, yeah, when you deal with, 因为有些是有情感那个语言里面，用第二个外语可能很难。
I write in English, as I said, it's a struggle. And I write, probably partly explain, I write so slowly. But usually I think I can find equivalent words to express emotions. That does not pose as a big problem for me.
Okay, so, all right, I think we have great fun this afternoon. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Nice panel, thank you.
Good job, yes.